There's one here.
Thank you for coming out tonight to a celebratory event to mark the publication of an important new book by our valued faculty member here at the New School for Public Engagement, Assistant Professor of Global Studies, Alexandra Délano. In this book, Alexandra analyzes how the Mexican state has shaped its objectives and interests regarding immigration and its relationship with the diaspora, and also how transformations in the dynamic of US-Mexico bilateral relations since the 1980s have influenced changes in the policies and politics of immigration.
I'm very proud to read and see this book. Congratulations. I think it will play a pivotal role in scholarship as to how Mexico has taken on some of the challenges related to first its diaspora community in the United States, but also second as to how we position ourselves to confront some of the new global trends. Migratory flows are changing the nature of international relations. So it's a distinct privilege to be here and to see so many good friends present here today. So immigration is no longer just a Mexico issue or just a US issue. For many, many decades, and Alexandra chronicles this in her book, immigration in the US-Mexico agenda was not a properly bilateral issue. First change, I think, was understanding that we needed to develop this holistic vision, that to do so we needed to frontally engage with the United States and inject this issue into the bilateral agenda per se, that talking about immigration and what happened on the border, and once our compatriots came into the United States, what happened inside the United States was not an afterthought of the diplomatic agenda, that it was a central core and a central component of that discussion. And I think this is where Alexandra's book is extremely useful and enriching, because she really is, I think, one of the few and first individuals in the United States that has started to look at what Mexico has built, the architecture that Mexico has built through the IME, the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, this institution that is part of the Foreign Ministry and which seeks to create diaspora ties with our communities in the United States by giving them a voice, providing co-stakeholdership and policies that affect them and affect their communities in their hometowns, in their states, in Mexico. I think this part is particularly important because no one had focused on this before in terms of what a country like Mexico is doing to create these mechanisms of liaison with our diaspora community in the United States. This is a very novel and interesting mechanism which, not surprisingly, we're now starting to get questions and queries from other governments that have important diaspora communities in the United States as to how we've pursued this model, how can they replicate this model with their communities, and how can we ensure that this is a two-way street which provides a win-win for both Mexico and our communities in the United States.
It is an unmitigated joy to see your book and hold it in my hands and make everybody else look at it. It's such a pleasure because it's a smart book and it's thoughtful and it's really thorough and it's quite creative. And I've really enjoyed reading it. It's really an impressive combination of history, ethnography, all wrapped and framed very elegantly within a political science dominant framework. One of the debates that she engages is the role of domestic politics in the changing relationship of Mexico with its diaspora. Now there was, for a long time, the dominant story here was Mexico has suddenly begun to reach out to its diaspora because it's realized that they're sending all that money back. And then most people doing work on this just sort of act like, okay, that's the explanation. They want the money, so they're going to start sending more ambassadors and more diplomats out here to help, sort of the tax collector theory of Mexico's relationship with its diaspora. And she goes in and critiques that very effectively, and she talks about the ways in which political change within Mexico has made over the last 20 years had created a situation where seeking the support of migrants became very politically important, both to try to legitimize the regime and to compete in an increasingly competitive political party system down in Mexico. There's a very, very new and interesting contribution here that she traces, and I think, and this echoes a bit with the ambassador's comments, which is that one of the key things to enable Mexico to develop this fuller relationship with its diaspora, I think you could make a plausible argument, and Ale's book would be a very important tool in making that argument, that the Mexican state has helped to form a diaspora, a consciousness of migrants as Mexicans in the United States, and to form the sense that they have a strong and ongoing relationship into the future with Mexico, which I don't think existed in the same form before. But she does a very, very nice job of getting inside the state and of documenting how the Mexican state and its actors had to change the way they thought, first about the diaspora, but also about themselves and their mission and their relationship with the United States. The tenet of non-intervention and putting Mexico's defense of its sovereignty by drawing a crisp line between everything between the US and Mexico was really getting in the way of cultivating relationships with its diaspora abroad. However, what she documents is that the people working within the Ministry of External Relations and people working particularly in a variety of programs in that were able to first of themselves reimagine how Mexico might relate to its diaspora, and then to institutionalize that. The Mexican Foreign Service created what I've called a diasporic bureaucracy, a set of diasporic bureaucracies to engage with this diaspora. And Ale does a really beautiful job at charting, documenting, and very elegantly elaborating on how those things were created.
It's a very humanizing book. I think, the part where she mentions of the leadership and the interviews that she conducted with the members of the CCIME, of the Advisory Council, they're very frank. There's this need about the people who are living here in the United States, the people who came here for a better life, now being allowed to go back to the country, the homeland, to go to Mexico and interact with the government, and to be listened to, and to be having a space of our own. And a lot of the things that I kept reading about, I kept saying, oh my God, this is what happened, or this is how it happened, It's very, very carefully thought out, a lot of the things that are mentioned, and especially the feelings of the leadership within the CCIME and the leadership in the IME. There's a conflict, there's an issue of paternalistic return. You go back home to face your father and you're a different child. And they're telling you that the programs that they have in the government are going to help your community. And if you're coming from California, or you're coming from Chicago, from New York, you know that the program is going to be applied differently. And the rules get played out according to what Alexandra says in the book, according to the Consul General's view of the world at that moment. So whether they see New Yorkers, Mexican New Yorkers, in a way that LA Mexicans are different, they apply those programs. But one of the things that I particularly enjoyed was the whole notion that there was a belief that the leadership could change, that the Mexicans in the United States could have an impact on how their homeland was improved, how Mexico and the politics in Mexico could be better for the quality of ourselves. So when there's a discussion about that the government wanted to grant us the rights to vote in Mexico and to find a way that we can participate politically, it sort of kind of mended some of those wounds and some of those fears that we were not wanted, yet we are needed. A lot of the programs that I discuss in the book about the IME and the CCIME are very viable and necessary things. And when she mentions that the ventanillas de salud, the health windows and the education windows that we have in the consulates are not only a way to bring people and to give them resources, but when they go to plazas comunitarias, they're also getting embedded and they get this idea of how to belong to the system, how to learn English and participate in the schools with the sons and daughters, to know the health system. And when our lives get better here, we have a chance to go back and have an influence how our hometowns are affected. A lot of the consejeros are going back, and I learned a lot from this network. It is true. We feel that the CCIME is the strongest component at the network building, because we're able to talk to people across the United States and discuss this 2006, for example, protest and pro-immigration reform. A lot of the leadership came about because they were, consejeros in the CCIME, and they knew that they wanted to get together, and other conversations took place. And we wanted to also have this effect in Mexico. and the young generation, the new people that are being given the opportunity in the communities across the United States, come about because this direct architecture was put in place back in the 80s and the 90s, and now after 2000 through this very specific policy of creating spaces for Mexicans abroad and creating this liaison where we can go back and support some of the agenda. But at the same time, I think there's a discussion where it says that it cannot be that the government is going to dictate what the Mexicans in New York, Mexicans in the United States are going to be thinking or saying. We go back and we have conflicts, we disagree, and we have healthy debates about what is needed, how is needed, we propose, and sometimes you don't all come back happy, but at the end, after the 18 hours meetings that we have in Mexico City, we always come back and return with the eagerness to work.
Yes, I think it's a very important question, and I talk a little bit about that at the end of the book because it came out, well, the last revisions were exactly when the SB 1070 was passed in Arizona. So I think one of the things that the book helps understand is why and how the Mexican government responded to that initiative, but not only to that one. There is a lot more work going on at the state and local level against these initiatives. And I think it really highlights what I'm talking about here, that Mexico has changed this idea that if it responds to these type of initiatives, that there's going to be a backlash. I guess a precedent was all of its activity in relation to Prop 187 in 1994, that can be kind of a point where Mexico started realizing that it could respond to these type of anti-immigrant initiatives and be more proactive. But in the current wave, and Ambassador Sarukhan can speak much more to this than I can, Mexico has, on the one hand, really responded to each of these initiatives very actively through the consulates and through the foreign ministry, responding to each of them with a much stronger language than it did in the past. But so that shows a change just in the discourse and the rhetoric, moving away from the traditional principle of non-intervention. But more importantly, I think it has created liaisons with groups in the U.S. that can help fight those initiatives more, perhaps from a less controversial point of view, because they're actors in the United States. So working with the ACLU, with the Hispanic organizations that the ambassador mentioned, MALDEF and LULAC, and all of the ones that are creating these coalitions to fight these initiatives.
So what I hope we've done, David, is that through these structures, through the empowerment of community-based organizations, through the networking that we've triggered, through the redes de profesionistas mexicanos, we've created sort of networks of Mexicans in each one of the states that can also sometimes work to provide support in these cases. What we're doing is starting to change the level playing field for our communities in the United States.
And as optimistic as I am about the value of what the IME has done, what the Mexican government has done, particularly in creating a network of migrant leaders and helping them communicate and establish relationships that in the long run will help them overcome some of the differences that have divided them, I think that will take a long time still. There have been a lot of efforts from the community to come together, to create coalitions, to promote immigration reform at the federal level, and also to fight certain initiatives at the local level that have failed because they still cannot overcome strong regionalisms and political dynamics that exist within the Mexican community. And I'm sure Jesus has that experience and I'll talk more about that. But I think that is a really big challenge, and the consulates and government are helping, and their partner organizations are helping with that, but there is still a long way to go to make that really work.
I found this discussion to be especially empowering as a U.S. citizen and a child of refugees, and as a global citizen. This is a much more and much needed optimistic interpretation of world changes than you would get from a lot of media coverage today. And I would also like to say that Alexandra's book and the discussion that we've had here today is such a wonderful example of engaged scholarship with heart and with head. And this is in the best and finest traditions of this university. So once again, congratulations. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Dr.